Thank you so much, Ron. So I'm really excited to introduce you to our keynote speaker today. Dr. Heather Nicole Bennett is the Director of Equity Services at Pennsylvania School Boards Association. In this role, she assists public school boards and districts in Pennsylvania with equity-focused tools, programming, trainings, research, and policies. Dr. Bennett is a licensed attorney in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Dr. Bennett was also a high school social studies teacher in Fulton County Board of Education in Georgia as part of the Teach for America Corp. Her scholarship and practice focuses on the intersection of education, law, and policy, primarily focusing on the impact of school and housing policies on the educational experiences and opportunities of marginalized students, families, and communities. Heather is my friend. She's my colleague, and she's just a really awesome individual. And I'm so excited that she's here with us today. And so Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, I'm going to mute myself. Okay, well, I want to say thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you so much for just the space to be able to have this conversation. And so I'm just going to share my screen right now. And we're going to get started. All right, and so my talk today is just really developing a foundation for culturally responsive and diverse teachers. And you don't need to see my bio. I'm gonna put this out here. It's really important that we situate ourselves, and when we're talking about this work, by focusing on what equity is. I know that a lot of y'all in your various school entity structures are dealing with a lot of conversations and attacks on equity and inclusion, on anti-racism, on the work that you're doing on supports of students. And it's so important as we're having this conversation about the need and the hope for culturally responsive teachers and leaders. And diverse teachers and leaders, that we need to really center in and define this work for ourselves. And so I want to start off with just recognizing that equity, in terms of the goal that we're having today, should stand as the foundation for this work. So as we're thinking about it, we need to come with it with a systems-based lens. So I'm going to share my definition in a minute, but think about it from a systems-based lens. And when I talk about systems-based, I'm talking about focusing on the roots, focusing on the foundation of our school entity and structure. When I say roots, I'm discussing the intricate network of processes that uphold and maintain the educational system, such as the policies, our legislation and our laws, our procedures, and our baked-in narratives that centers and has centered for generations the status quo. That has centered, of course, able-bodied, monolingual, white, middle-class, hetero, cisgendered persons, communities, and staff, as well as ideologies, and marginalizes those that do not fit within those frameworks. We struggle to diversify our staff and to promote culturally responsive teaching and leadership is because we keep thinking about practices. Which changes from year to year. We get a new school board director here, we get a new administration here. But what I'm asking all of us to kind of think through, especially during this talk, is how do we focus on invalidating systems, inequitable systems, policies and procedures that are baked into the roots of our educational entities. And so it's a lot to say here, but that's kind of where I want us to frame this conversation on is how do we talk about the foundations that makes it very difficult to move towards a culturally responsive and diverse teaching force, and then also how do we create opportunities for that through our looking at and recreating our systems as well. And so at PSVA, we have defined equity as the just and fair distribution of resources based upon each individual student's needs. Equitable resources include funding, programs, policies, initiatives, and supports that target each student's unique background and school context to guarantee that all students have equal access to a high quality education. And what I'm going to ask you all in the chat, if you have a definition of equity for your school entity, please put it in the chat so you can share with the rest of the group. And we start off with a definition of equity to make sure that we're very clear on what we're talking about when we're moving towards developing culturally responsive school leaders and teachers, as well as diverse teachers and school leaders. And so I just kind of want to get started here on really framing like the benefits of a culturally responsive and diverse teachers. You probably heard this throughout this entire conference, but and also in your own space, but I kind of just want to start off with this. But before we get into the actual data and research, I just want you to put in the chat, along with if you have an equity statement, who is your favorite teacher? What grade subject did they teach and why were they your favorite? I'm just going to give you like a minute to kind of put that and populate the chat on this question. Awesome. All right. So as you all are populating the chat, this is me, my fourth grade self at 10 years old in Mrs. Garrett's class at Cheltenham Elementary School. And I just want us to start this conversation when we're talking about this work. It's personal to us, right? We all have teachers that we remember that believed in us, that challenged us, that made us feel excited to go into the classroom every single day. At the same time, we also have teachers and leaders that have caused us harm, and we remember those stories just as well. And so, as we center this conversation today and really talk about systems, I want us to remind ourselves that it's not just the right thing to do, it's also personal. We remember what it was like to be a kid and remember what it's like to be in the classroom. And what I didn't ask of you in this question, in this space as well, is when did you have your first teacher, of teacher of color or teacher from a distinctly diverse background? When was the first age that you experienced in that? For me, I was 12 years old in sixth grade. And so this work is important, just recognizing access to diverse teachers, but also access to culturally responsive teachers that believe in our dreams. Awesome. So real quick, I just want to hit to the benefits here. So we know the benefits here. We know that teachers of color specifically are known to improve the academic outcomes for students of color. Teachers of color are more likely to have a positive view of students and student behavior, to seek out positions in non-white high poverty school districts, and dismantle negative and persisting stereotypes and perceptions of populations of color. Furthermore, studies have shown that if a student who is taught by a teacher of the same race has a lower likelihood of exclusionary discipline, as well as perform better on standardized testing and view their teachers favorably. And so again, as I'm talking through that, please put this in the chat if I'm missing anything in terms of this list. But just we know that there is a benefit to when we're receiving and having a diverse teaching cadre. Another piece of the puzzle is that this is benefits not only for students of color, it benefits white students to encounter teachers of color who are knowledgeable and have some authority over them as well. And so this is extremely important for us to kind of reflect on. And so here are some of my resources, and I'll make sure I'll provide these resources at the end of my talk. But I really want to quickly get through this piece about how do we think about, again, the system structure and the foundation for equity. And again, I'm coming from a very school board lens, right? I'm thinking from a systems lens. And so we talk about culturally responsive teaching as important, but we need to really talk about culturally responsive school leadership. And for the most part, it's very similar to the pedagogy of culturally responsive teaching, right? Critical self-reflection of leadership behaviors, talking about implicit bias and stereotypes. It's in charge of making sure that we're creating a welcoming environment that's baked in the histories and stories and affirming our students and families' histories, backgrounds and experiences. But here's something that's really important. It is the job of culturally responsive school leaders to develop culturally responsive teachers. School board directors, superintendents, administrators, it is important for us to think about that piece of this pedagogy. And so I'm not going to get a lot into the data either. You've been hearing it all week, but I really want us to kind of see this as well. The access to diverse teachers, as we can see here, and this is from a Research for Action study, is really focused. As you can see, it hasn't really shifted much. We're having our students of color are rising in terms of demographics. We're at 34% now. Yet our teachers of color are static at around 5.5%. I'm also going to add in school board directors are very similar. Our students of color are rising, yet our school board directors are ranging around, school board directors of color are ranging around 5%. I was like, as you can see, the leaders are not reflecting where our students need to be, or our students are right now. And so it's extremely important that we really think about how devastating this is, but also recognizing that this is a systems answer. It's a systems problem, then it requires a systems answer. And so before I get into solutions to this, I really want us to kind of have a quick conversation on really, why do we see this happening? Eric Duncan in his last talk yesterday talked about history of segregation and integration, and how Black and brown teachers were denied access to integrated schools. There is a cultural and historical context that is important to discuss here. But as you can see here, we are really educating economically, linguistically, and ethnically and racially diverse student body. Yet we continuously perpetuate, promote, and also define as quality, and focusing on the norms and perceptions of those that are white, able-bodied, middle class, and English speaking. And so what does that do for our students when they don't see themselves not only in the teachers, but they don't see themselves in the curriculum, and they don't see themselves in how they're being taught and what values are being taught as well. And so this is an important work, because we know that equity, remember, starting from the beginning, is providing students what they need so that they can have access to a high quality education. Oh yeah, great. I'm reading the chat. Close Responsible School Leadership by Muhammad Khalifa is fantastic. And so I want to kind of end this talk at the last, I don't know how much time I have left.
You're good, good.
Oh,
You're
great.
good.
Well, I'm just going to go and talk then. Okay, I'm going to end this talk really on really focusing on frameworks and talking about systems and how to investigate and really invalidate the oppressions that we're seeing along the teacher pipeline, right? And so as we're talking through that, we have to understand that it doesn't just start off with, okay, hiring a new teacher or retaining a teacher of color, or it starts from the very beginning. It starts with, do students even want to become teachers? And so we're going to investigate some of these elements, this pipeline, from a systems lens, and also figure out ways that we can come up with system solutions. So student desire, first, is to become a teacher. 2, they graduate from high school. 3, they are graduating from college, as they're accessing college, enrollment in an education school program. 5, student teaching. 6, they're graduating from college. 7, they're passing content area and testing. 8, they're getting hired to a first teaching job. 9, their retention at the school that they're working in. And of course, 10, chosen to become a school leader. And we're not going to investigate all aspects of this, but we're going to talk about 1, 2, and 3. We're really going to focus in on 8, and we're going to finish it off on 9 and 10. And if you have any questions about the rest of it, please, I'm welcoming. I would love to have a deeper conversation with all of you on all aspects of this pipeline. So let's start from the very beginning, right? Students' desire to become a teacher. How this is going to be broken down. We're going to talk about the problem is, and we're going to talk about a solution. The problem is this: our students are coming into our classrooms experiencing racism, classism, other forms of systemic oppression in their schools. Why would they want to become a teacher? Okay, if the trauma that they're experiencing is not at home, but in the classroom. And so it's really important to be really reflective of that. And so our data shows this, right? Students of color are less likely to be recommended for gifted programs. Students have less likely to access rigorous coursework. They are more likely to be bullied. They are more likely also to be suspended. And they are less likely to be heard or centered in terms of opportunity, but also within focus groups amongst leadership. So it's extremely, extremely important that we really are understanding that how are we going to get students to even want to go into teaching if we can't actually make sure that the environment that they're existing in is going to lift them up and make them feel valued. And so this is something that we need to really address. So how do we do this, right? How do we think about solutions? And again, this is limited. I want to hear from you all. And so please put this in the chat as I'm moving down this pipeline, is that we need to make school a more positive experience for students. Now, it seems very simple on its face, but and everyone says that, and it's probably a part of everybody's mission and vision of their school entity. But do we actually do the things that we say we're going to do? And so that requires, again, remember, going into the roots, going into the very foundation of your school entity and really dismantling and rethinking the ways in which we thought about education. Are we developing anti-racist, equity, and culture responsive and trauma-informed policies? Are we developing the procedures for those policies and action plans? Are we making sure that our teachers and staff, as well as our community members, are engaged in professional development on this work? Again, we're in the midst of a lot of conversation about what's going on in terms of this equity and inclusion work across the country and across the Commonwealth. If we are not engaging in developing policies and procedures that are going to make it easier for Black and Brown students, LGBTQ students, students with disabilities, students who are experiencing trauma, a safe place for them, then why would they want to stay into the classroom themselves? Also, we need to center voices of students and families in decision making. And we also need to develop accountability structures and metrics for staff and be holding them accountable for discriminatory actions. Okay. Then, of course, there's Grow Your Own program, recruit students into the teaching profession. There are, I want to lift up Pittsburgh Public Schools magnet program, Brashear High School, which is focusing on developing teachers in Pittsburgh. And so specifically Black and Brown teachers to come back into the classroom and work for the school and school district. And so it's extremely important for us to be reflective about how we think about students' desire to become teachers. Let's talk about graduate from high school and college access. And so we know there's an achievement gap in terms of access to, in terms of graduation from high school. But again, we always have to reflect on why, right? And so this is the 2018-2019 PDE, coming from PDE graduation rate. And as you can see here, as you see in these spaces, we have about a graduation rate of 87%, yet our students of color, specifically Black and Latinx students, are around 75.4%. Our students, our ELL, English language learner students, are graduating at 69%. And I don't really want to focus so much on this per se, because this tells you what the outcomes are. They don't explain why. And that's where opportunity gaps come into play. But as we're reflecting on this, we have to understand that there's something that we need to do to really reframe the structure in which our students are experiencing so that they can have a high quality education. And so how do we think about this? Again, I'm going to focus in on the bottom. Are we providing students of color, girls, English learners, and students with disabilities and their intersections access to rigorous coursework and supports? Are we thinking about detracking? Are we thinking about making sure that that we're listening to our students about what they need and how they learn, right? Are we dealing with the opportunity gaps that we're finding in terms of school discipline, in terms of access to trauma and mental health supports, in terms of access to coursework, in terms of early childhood education, in terms of all these elements that are a part of the school system that is creating these achievement gaps in our district? Detracking is dealing with specifically access to AP and rigorous courses and gifted courses. So this last bit, we're gonna talk about getting hired to first teaching job. This is step 8. And I kind of want to spend a little bit of time here. So the problems, though, I think is really important, and I've worked with a lot of districts, is that there is these myths and stereotypes that we hear coming from teacher leaders and school leaders and administrators about terms of hiring. There's always these perceptions. They're not the best fit. There's this fit argument all the time. And so we have to understand and question that, right? Because what fit is saying is that fit in quality is really based into the cultural and also demographic background of those in power, right? And so we need to question this construct of fit. Another thing that I hear too is like, oh, teachers of color do not want to work here. You know, this is not Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or Reading or Lancaster. And that's another thing that we need to kind of try, because we know this. Our districts are changing demographically. They no longer concentrated in certain areas over others. As you can see, we are shifting dramatically in terms of our racial and ethnic backgrounds. And so that conversation that they don't exist, they don't live in our communities, or they don't want to go here, I don't think is necessarily true, because our demographics are shifting so dramatically. And so it's really, really important for us to be reflective of these constructs and these I call stereotypes about how we view hiring. I think it's important in terms of redefining solutions. We got to redefine quality and best fit. I think it's times we need to start a rubric, maybe develop a rubric for hiring that centers candidates that teach a specific content area, that's questions that are culturally responsive. We want to make sure they're interpersonal. They're promoting anti-racism and the visions of that district. And of course, recognizing the empathy and humanity of our students. We need to stop just focusing in on grades and networks, because our networks are reflective of who we know. I'm going to really quickly here, and this will be one of the last things I say, is recruitment. We have to set an ambitious diversity goal for hiring that is understood by administration and board directors. It's extremely important that the board has to be a part of this process moving forward. Embed this in policy through an equity educational plan. View your existing policies to see what barriers is making it hard for other people to access especially teachers and diverse teachers and teachers from marginalized backgrounds to access your school. We got to recruit teachers in diverse communities and spaces. We got to recruit early. Please just don't wait until the end of a student's educational space. Let's do it from the beginning, when they are first entering their educational program. How are we developing grow your own programs for support teacher aides and second career professionals into the workforce? And I really want to say this last bit. Provide resources and information that targets the needs of teachers of color and teachers from diverse backgrounds. If you want them in your community and you want them to teach in your community, where's a grocery store that there's going to get their cultural foods? And where can they go to church and worship, or go to a synagogue, or go to temple? Housing community spaces, LGBTQ community centers and spaces. How are you selling your district to make it easier for people to access your community so that they feel safe in your community as well? I'm going to, one more thing here is like, develop a diverse team of interviewers, require anti-bias training for hiring committee. And of course, what are your questions you're asking? Instead of asking them, tell me about a time when because that creates a limited experience for certain people that might not have that experience. Start to ask questions to what would you do in a situation, so you're getting into their knowledge, moving this work forward. And of course, we got to hire more than one teacher of color. You got to develop a cohort. Higher education does this so that they're not alone and isolated in the district. So I'm going to just move forward here and kind of want to hit this last point, because I know I'm out of time. And this goes really fast, and I could talk about this all day. But what are some short-term strategies and long-term strategies for these school entities? You got to reevaluate your concept of fit. You got to think about a culture ad. And that, again, is a system-based space. It's not just saying, I'm going to rethink it. No, you got to start developing actual practices. Your questions, the way you're hiring, the way you are educating through professional development is going to help you reevaluate that. Recruit teachers in diverse community spaces and recruit early. Develop hiring questions that focus on culturally responsive teaching. And of course, professional development, ongoing professional development. What I didn't say here is making sure that you are centering and through focus groups, centering and listening to your teachers of color, or your community members of color, as well as your students of color, and also students from marginalized backgrounds. Long-term, grow your own programs, thinking through that. Developing a culturally responsive anti-racism environment through your policies, reevaluating your policies and your practices and procedures through an equity lens. And of course, provide resources and supports and information that's going to bring teachers of color and teachers from marginalized backgrounds to your district and community, What would make them feel comfortable in your district? And it can't be from the viewpoint of who has traditionally come into your district. It has to be from the viewpoint of who do you want in your district and community. And so that's it. Like I said, this was fun. And I don't know if there's any time for questions, but I just really have been having fun doing this presentation and looking at all this stuff in the chat. So I don't know how to end things, so I'm just going to just be quiet.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Yeah.
If you could take down your screen.
Yes, no